Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our next Water in Business, Driving Change in the Boardroom. I'm really happy to welcome our panelists to the stage, starting with Melissa Dogo, Program Manager, Swedish Waterhouse. Johanna Fabre, Sustainability Water Director at Danone. And Aude Farneau, Economist and Policy Analyst for the Water Team at the OECD. So ladies, putting water at the heart of decision-making, both in the public and private sectors, is really critical. We've heard a lot of the discussion in the last few days about water and mainstreaming it with other communities as well. But at the heart of this is that decision-makers understand how to value and prioritize water. And we've talked about the different ways in which this can be done, but bringing leadership into the discussion is going to be really important. And what we want to talk about today is, how do we do that? And how has it been done? How can we replicate? And what toolkit can we share in terms of getting people, the right people to hear the right messages? So I want to start the panel by asking all of you a question. And that is, in your perspectives, where you sit and where you work, what is the state of decision-making today with respect to water? And what is it lacking, or what does it need to do more of? Melissa, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Arati. So I would like to actually start by just sharing something, a news from 2020, actually. So the Mexican city of Mexicali denied a water permit for a proposed 1.4 billion USD brewery project by a brand. Water was cited as a primary concern, with estimates indicating the facility's needs could amount to 25% of the city's water reserves. The company's share fell 10% on the news of the vote, and eventually the brewer abandoned the project. So that's just one of many examples how water can have serious implication on a business. And so in my work and in my experience working with the private sector, I see that the state of water and so the materiality and how water actually impacts a business and the impact that the business has on water is not fully recognized or fully understood. A lot of businesses, from what I've seen so far, although they are understanding increasingly the interlinkages between climate change and water, they don't always fully grasp what is the real value that water has for their business. So I would say it's coming up more, and we can see that with, for example, over 240 companies that have signed up or endorsed the CEO Water Mandate, which I think is great. We have the EU taxonomy now that actually require corporates to disclose the sustainable use and protection of water and marine resources. So I would say these are kind of implications that things are moving forward, but also being the young professional that I am and a bit impatient, I would say we need to see more progress.
And what you're saying really is that these external factors are creating the internal reaction that's working in a positive way. But really, it is that external mechanism that's pushing change.
I would say so, yes.
Danone, Jan.
Decision-making within companies have changed quite a lot recently. We used to, after the definitions of the SDGs in 2015, all the companies were about commitments, and the moment now, after having taken all those commitments, is to operationalize all those commitments. And how do you actually make that happen in the field? So this is where we pretty much stand, and in making real transformations within the company. Today it's really about adopting new language when you want to talk about water with your executive committee members. We have recently translated water-related risk into financial type of metrics to be in capacity to talk the same language than the COMEX. Someone once told me that you can have in-depth conversations only with people that have the same references than you, and that's true. You can engage with the COMEX only if you talk kind of the same language. So we're exactly in this shift or transitions from commitments to operationalizations, and then in adopting a new type of language.
Before I go to Aude, I just want to reconfirm what you're saying, because I think it's a critical point. And you use intangibility to make that point, and I think it's important. People understand the same references, and you have to speak the language of the people that you're talking to, and you say, if you create a financial understanding of water-related risks, that change can happen. So finance speaks to finance in a certain way, and if we're going to get things into the boardroom, we need to speak that language and repackage it in a way that's understood. Or would you sit on the numbers? I'm going to come to you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So, on your question on is water being given the attention it needs by decision makers, particularly in the industry and in business. So there's been an increased focus on water-related issues recently, without any doubts. It's very positive, but it's also obviously also worrying because if water is gaining attention, it's because there's an increase in frequency of water-related disasters such as floods, droughts, drying up of soils, wildfires, pollution. And if we focus on industries and businesses, they start to understand that they should be concerned about water risks. But the awareness of their exposure and vulnerability to water risks and the potential financial impacts is really at the beginning. It's really nascent, and it should really be encouraged. Right now, according to the IPCC, 99% of financing is going in the wrong direction. 99% of investments are increasing vulnerability and exposure to climate and water risks. It means that water is still far from receiving the attention it deserves, particularly from the industry and from businesses.
But then I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, because in that light, you also are the Secretariat for the Roundtable on Financing Water, and you've had 9 meetings. And I find that fascinating because, well, actually, something's being done right. People are coming back to the table. They want to understand more. They want to engage more. Tell us more about the Roundtable. Who are your stakeholders, and what do they want to see?
Good question. So indeed, the lack of exchange and mutual understanding between the water communities on one side and the finance community on the other side, including the industry, corporates, etc., is often cited as one of the main barriers to investments in water. So we created the Roundtable on Financing Water in response to this need of improved discussion and mutual understanding between the water and finance communities, with the idea of bringing them to the same table regularly, but also bridging the data and analytical gaps on water risks, on transmission channels of these water risks, and on financial impacts. So as you said, we organized in 5 years 9 meetings, either focusing on regions, so analyzing regional specificities in Asia, Europe, the America. The next one is on Africa in November, also on specific themes, water and climate, agricultural water. And in our next meeting in Africa, we'll discuss about leveraging private sector investments and water risks and implications for financial institutions, particularly in Africa. So if we focus on why industry and businesses are interested in coming and speak with the water community, it's because it enables them to understand the specific features of water in terms of investment opportunities, but also the risks associated with not taking water-related risks into account in their investment decisions. So it's important for the finance community and the private sector to care about water and engage with the water community, both from a risk perspective, from the risk side, better understanding exposure and vulnerability to water risks, transmission channels, financial impacts, and also from the opportunity side, better understanding the benefits and opportunities of investing in water.
And when you say bridging, I think that's a really important, and I think Jan also made that point, is that you need to speak the same language. And not everyone does, so you have to give them the capacity and the tools to do that. And finance is a subject that gets left out a lot of times because it's not understood. And understanding the de-risking mechanism that you talk about when it comes to investment is so critical. And I want Melissa to kind of follow up on what Ord said, because of course, Swedish Waterhouse sits on the intersection of business and water. You're working also to effectively capacity build, to say it makes sense to invest in this, and here's why. What are the main elements in your toolkit to have that conversation?
So I think Odd made really strong points here. And I think for us, as the water community and as Swedish Waterhouse and even other non-governmental actors, I think it's so important for us also to understand what is the business standpoint. And especially if we talk about the board level, it's very high up. I mean, they have to, of course, exercise board oversight. But we need to also give them the business case. We kind of need to build that business case of why is it important to put water at the center of what they do. So not only having water as a CSR initiative or as some part of the sustainability work, but really, and that's what we do a lot, trying to help and support companies understanding why it's so vital to see and embed water as a key part of their own core business, because I think that's when we will see concrete changes. And that
Before I come to you, I want to ask a follow-up question to that. What have you seen in the success stories that you've engaged with as one of the key points that's been that aha moment? Be like, of course, this should be something that we look at in terms of our board strategy.
I mean, numbers are important. They want to see numbers and understand. I always hear, okay, but what's the business case? What's the return on investment? Why should we invest in this? So even though I personally believe, I mean, it should be enough to just say it's a good cause, but that is not enough a lot of times. So having those kind of figures up front, and also helping and supporting the businesses see what are the risks in our own value chain, in our supply chain. So kind of just doing like a mapping, an initial mapping of where their water risks are highest, and especially where they, for example, if they have production in high-risk basin areas or in high water-stressed regions. I found that after those kind of conversations and where we've been able to show that very tangibly and supporting each other, then it's easier to have the conversation of, okay, now we see this, what's next?
Exactly. So, Jehan, I come to you as the voice of industry on this panel. I mean, it's been said by both panelists that numbers speak very loudly, but how do you make that change agnostic to the person making the change? Now, you sit with Danone, and what's amazing to see, you've taken so many steps in water stewardship, and you've grown in the last 3 years. And that's such a positive sign. If you can decouple from growth and say there's not a choice here, it's actually a win-win outcome. This is something that, of course, can speak volumes. So from your perspective, what have been the key steps that you've taken within Danone to make this water value understood?
I read one of the CDP reports, I think it was 3 years ago, that was saying that cost of inactions is more important than cost of actions. So having that in mind and following the continuum of decision-making within companies, starting with the water-related risk assessment we do every year, I decided to add some layers. So on top of doing your water risk assessment, which is the usual one we're all doing within the companies, you look at physical, reputational, regulatory risk. I added up the water footprint, so understanding really the dependencies we have from the water resources and the vulnerabilities we have as well, plus the impact we have as well on the environment. And we added up one more, which is business variables. So volumes spent you have when you buy an ingredient or turnover of your production sites. With the 3 variables, we're in capacity to really understand which ingredients, which production site, or which watersheds is really material for Danone, and where we can make a true transformations locally. Because at the end, we develop all these tools is to make things on the ground. It has helped us to prioritize very well ingredients, production site, watersheds, and geographies, and sometimes as well to optimize. So there are places where our watersheds, production site, and supply chains are actually at the same place, and by acting on the same landscape, we can tackle several risks at the same time and create value for the known, of course, but as well for society, with much bigger impact because we are addressing several challenges and issues at the same time.
And what's been key in bringing that to the leadership level? Because you said you added some layers to that assessment that you thought were valuable to understand the 360 of the situation. What were the steps you took to make that possible in terms of getting the board or the leadership to understand this is actually necessary to get a perspective of what the decisions should be?
I did those analyses, presented them to my CFO. He was a bit scared. Said, yes, there is a real interest actually in doing something. This is mainly how it happened. And this year, I'm very pleased because for the first time we will have a budget line integrated into Danone's P&L to address exactly water-related risk across the company. So at the end, it works. And I did this work with a company called Blue Risk, Paul Rick, which is helping us. So if you need someone to help you through this exercise, you can contact him.
But that partnership, that innovation, that collaboration is also critical because Danone will need to work with people who can actually help you ask the questions and answer them with the data as well. Mm-hmm. And when we spoke, we talked about real examples of companies that have misunderstood how important it is to take water into their ROI, as Melissa says, and what this can actually do to their bottom line. I want you to share some case studies with us of these.
Yeah, so currently there's a lot of attention around the question of channeling more money to finance investments that contribute to water security. But actually, financing needs would be considerably lower if we stopped building future liabilities. And if we are serious about climate action and water security, we must redirect and change how 99% of the investments are allocated so that they actually mitigate climate change, support adaptation to changing climate, restore hydrological cycles, minimize exposure and vulnerability to water risks. And if some water risks are considered financially material in the financial system, this could in turn affect the allocation of financial flows, encouraging more money to go into investments that reduce the physical or economic exposure and vulnerability to water risks, and less money supporting investments that increase this exposure and vulnerability. As Gian was saying earlier, in most sectors, the cost of action is less than the cost of inaction. It would be around 5 times less. And water risk can have significant impacts on business value now and increasingly in the future, as it was evidenced by studies such as the one done by CDP or CRS. And thanks to that, corporates and financial institutions are starting to act. For instance, the Spanish bank BBVA has issued the world's first water footprint loan, which offers a lower rate of interest to companies if company reduces water consumption. So another example is the Central Bank of the Netherlands, who started to study the flood risks in the country from a financial stability perspective. Initial results are showing that there are implications for the financial systems, including credit risks, as evidenced by the overlap between distribution of houses, loans, and flood risks. So the experience of DNB showed that there was information on flood risks, but data was missing to assess exposure, and work was needed to generate data on stress. So more generally, there are data gaps, and filling those data gaps really help drive change in the boardroom.
But the data gaps question is very interesting because, of course, data is only useful for how you choose to package it, right? Otherwise, it's just a lot of numbers that no one won't necessarily understand. But then that also brings you into, we touched upon it yesterday as well, misinformation, and how data is misused, and how messages are misleading. And I actually wanted to ask all of you, in terms of the work you're doing, when it comes to valuing water and bringing it to the leadership level, how do you engage with misinformation in a way that can be constructive so that the right messages are heard and you can cut through the noise of what can be mismanaged data? Melissa, I'm going to come to you first.
Yes. So just starting off, top of mind, I have an example of when in my previous work, where we worked in supporting businesses understanding, for example, wash risk in their supply chain. And there, we've seen, and sometimes suppliers, for different reasons, perhaps like wrong numbers are showing up, for example, in different audits and such. So I think having that kind of good dialogue with the suppliers has been important to kind of verify and see, but also we've been at the sites to really verify and see what's happening. So actually doing more contextual assessments as well. I think that has been one part, but also in the broader spectrum, I think, for example, AI can be quite interesting actually when we talk about this. Water, now we've talked a lot about water risk, but also even opportunities, and especially in the boardroom, I think, for example, using AI could be interesting to analyze trends quite fast and be able to, assess the water footprint, as also Jehan was talking about, and really using that as a kind of foundation for part of the decision making. But I think it's also really important with, for example, AI, to also consider the ethical implications, of course, but also in light of all these new technologies to also, I think we've heard it a lot these past days, to also include indigenous knowledge and not only heavily focus on the new technologies, but really combining these two.
It comes back to the value chain discussion that you were having in the beginning to say, if the board understands the kind of A to Z of what's happening within the company, they're in a better position to make decisions. And then, of course, with AI and with technology, you can broaden that scope.
Yeah.
So you have a full kind of cognition of what's happening. But when it comes to getting the right message to the board, and when it comes to getting the right message to decision makers, and what Danon has done, for example, how have you handled possible confusing data, misinformation? How have you been able to trust and be transparent about the decisions you've taken?
Yes, the questions of data is always the questions, because if you don't have robust data, all the analyses you're making somehow are not robust neither. At the same time, we shouldn't stop there. It won't be perfect, but it's an iterative process. You start by gathering the data you have, and then you see some gaps, and then you work with your procurement team, you work with your operational team, with some partners on the ground to make sure that you improve those data over the time. AI, why not? It's going to help. It's not going to be a magical tool neither, right? We're not going to be saved by tech, or at least I don't believe so. But it's a good support. I think we just have to be transparent, use tools that have been standardized. You have the World Resources Institute, water risk filters, many data sets that are out there, hoping that they are going to be more and more updated, because we're struggling with data sets that are not updated enough, let's say. But we should not stop there. It's not because we don't have the perfect data that we can't actually make our case somehow within the company.
But like you said, you mentioned before the partners that you work with, and they become kind of your data translators as well. If you have partners that you trust, they can also help you understand the data and know which data to rely on. But then I want to come back, because when we spoke before, and this is what I really want to touch for the audience to understand, is how Jehan is working. Because you're setting up frameworks in your company. And these frameworks are based on what you find important. And like you said, speaking the language of finance. But also, as Melissa is saying, understanding the power of the communities at the lower levels of the discussion. How do you create, and this is really the kind of silver bullet question for today, how do you create that template within industry that is not personal to someone like you, who understands how the A to Z comes together? How do you package that so that this water question can be replicated?
So, bringing water into the boardroom is about language, financial metrics, fair, and it's actually to help you prioritize your interventions. When it comes to intervention, it's not about language anymore, it's about value. And of course, when you decide to intervene, you have to take into account so many other values that matters for society to make a real change. For that, we have adopted some principles that are been developed by the Valuing Water Initiative that are in the room today. And by having that, you are in capacity to make sure you consider the full system in which you would like to develop a project. You are based on the challenges, the context, all the stakeholders that are there, and you are really a driver, a system change driver. And it's not about finance anymore. It's about the real true change you can actually make with the communities around you. Because at the end of the day, social acceptance of companies like ours will depend on the capacity we are to really make a transformation.
I mean, what you're saying, I think, is so critical to kind of take a moment and listen to, is that to embed this, to institutionalize this, it should not be because you think so, it's because it just makes business sense, but we manifest it within the company's, operating procedures. So I'm going to end this panel by asking each of you, in the information that you presented today and the data that you have with you, what do you see being the critical driver to actually get leadership, to actually value water? I'm going to start with Aude, actually.
So critically, it remains really important to strengthen the understanding of water challenges in finance discussions, as well as in climate and nature discussions. And this points to an important need for strong collaboration between the finance communities and the water communities to improve collective understanding of how, as I was saying earlier, water risks translate into financial risks, and to develop the necessary tools and data to assess financial materiality. So in particular, the water community can engage with financial supervisors and corporates to bridge data and methodological gaps, really trying to document transmission channels, the order of magnitude of financial material impacts, and how policymakers and financial institution can address them can really be a game changer.
This kind of bi-directional capacity building, because both sides need to understand each other.
Exactly.
Melissa?
I think I would say, well, we can't expect board members to be subject matter experts, right? But what they have to do, especially if we want them to have this board oversight, is actually having a clear direction for the company's water efforts, and I think sometimes even incentivizing, like the CEO or so, to kind of push that change and see more change in that area. But then also, as I've said before, I think building that business case is really important, not just for company specific, but even for a whole industry, so that like a whole industry can shift and change. And finally, I mean, I would like for us to just shut the supply for 1 week, and then let's see if they won't act.
That's in the toolkit, just everyone's taking notes. Johan, I'm going to end the panel with you.
Leadership is about action, so let's not be perfect, let's just engage, let's just act, let's just prove our case. We have many opportunities, we have many solutions out there. We just need to accelerate and make it happen all together, collectively.
And have people within the system that are actually pushing that change, like the ladies on the panel today. Please join me in giving them a warm hand of applause. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.